The moment the email popped up on my screen, I knew my entire morning and maybe my career was about to flip upside down. $95,000. Urgent payout. Catastrophic ransomware claim. I froze, staring at the numbers and the client name. A multi-state healthcare chain whose systems were locked and data encrypted. The CEO's earlier message about fast-tracking the claim to protect stock price suddenly felt like a countdown, and everyone around me was already moving, whispering, running from conference room to conference room as if the building itself was about to collapse. 8 years. 8 long, invisible years I had spent catching fraud, flagging inconsistencies, and quietly documenting everything, only to watch my work repackaged by managers and presented as their own brilliance while I stayed in the background, nodding politely, smile on my face, anger bottled up. I knew the story the client was telling sounded urgent, emotional, justified, but when I dug into the raw data, my gut screamed otherwise. There were red flags they hadn't noticed, details they had ignored, vulnerabilities that could turn the claim into a disaster for the company if overlooked. And now, the file was literally in my hands. I could rubber stamp it, let them celebrate another smooth payout, and remain invisible. Or I could dig deeper, follow the evidence, and risk shaking the entire floor, exposing the mistakes no one wanted to see. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I opened the first spreadsheets. The policies, the email chains, the forensic notes I had saved months ago, all lined up like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the truth they never asked me to find. Every step I took reminded me why I'd stayed quiet for so long. Speaking up early would have made me a target, a problem, a person to sideline. But staying silent now could cost the company millions. I felt a calm, dangerous clarity settle in. The irony wasn't lost on me. The people who had dismissed me for being too cautious were now counting on me to approve the largest claim in the company's history, and only I had the knowledge to prevent disaster. I scrolled through the first discrepancies, my pulse steady, heart racing at the same time, knowing that the choices I made in the next few minutes would define not just the payout, but who I really was. And for the first time in years, the power wasn't just in the numbers. It was in me, and I was ready to use it. As I opened the detailed loss run and policy files, my eyes immediately locked on the first anomaly, a glaring omission in the client's security protocols that everyone else had ignored, buried under months of routine updates and approval stamps. Multi-factor authentication wasn't implemented, despite my memo warning them 18 months ago, and there were clear gaps in their vulnerability reporting logs that directly violated the policy clauses I had spent years mastering. My pulse quickened, not with panic, but with the cold thrill of knowing the truth was finally in my hands, and the power it gave me. Every spreadsheet I scrolled through confirmed what I had feared. There were email threads documenting prior warnings, ignored vulnerabilities, and internal approvals rubber-stamped without scrutiny. This wasn't oversight. It was negligence, and it could cost the company $95 million if I didn't act. I leaned back for a second, letting the gravity of it sink in. For 8 years, I had been sidelined. My work quietly, co-opted by colleagues and managers, who took credit for diligence they didn't have. And now in one moment, the narrative could flip completely. I started compiling everything meticulously, highlighting policy breaches, noting exact timestamps, attaching every supporting document, every internal email, every memo that proved the client had failed to implement the controls they were contractually obliged to maintain. I could almost hear the whispers if someone noticed. Why is she digging so deep? But I didn't care. This wasn't about recognition anymore. It was about control, accuracy, and accountability. I could let the claim slide and become invisible again, or I could stop it and ensure the company wasn't bleeding $95 million because of someone else's oversight. Each file I attached, every note I highlighted, felt like building a fortress of evidence that no one could argue with, no one could ignore. And as I prepared to submit the dossier to the claims committee, I realized just how much time I had spent perfecting this moment, without even knowing it. All those years of quiet observation, note-taking, catching the smallest discrepancies, had led to this. The floor buzzed with excited chaos outside my office. managers celebrating the speed and magnitude of the claim, but I sat there calm, deliberate, ready to be the one who finally flipped the script. Not for glory, not for revenge, but because finally, the truth had a chance to speak. I took a deep breath and started drafting my formal recommendation. Every word deliberate, every citation precise. Coverage denied. Failure to mitigate. My hands hovered over the keyboard, knowing that once I hit send, there would be no going back. I attached the full evidence chain. The 110-page forensic dossier, email threads proving repeated warnings, policy wording highlighted in red, and every regulatory citation that supported my conclusion. I could almost feel the weight of the $95 million pressing down on me, but strangely, it steadied me rather than paralyzed me. I double-checked the automatic CC to myself, ensuring a secure record existed in my inbox, time-stamped, undeniable. Outside, the office buzzed with excitement, managers patting themselves on the back for the fastest claim turnaround ever, oblivious to the fact that the narrative they celebrated was built on shaky foundations. I could almost hear the gasps if someone opened my dossier. Without context, the gaps, the ignored vulnerabilities, the client's negligence, it was all there, clear as day and utterly impossible to dismiss. My pulse stayed calm, my mind laser-focused, as I scheduled the auto-send to the claims committee and reinsurers, exactly 48 hours before the formal deadline, giving them enough time to act without tipping off anyone who might try to manipulate the process. Every minute I spent reviewing the attachments, every careful note I added, reminded me of the years I had spent overlooked. Every almost promotion, every time my diligence was repackaged as someone else's insight. And now, for the first time, the power balance had shifted completely. They thought they were moving the claim at their pace, but I held the levers, the evidence, and the timing that could control the outcome. I leaned back, staring at my screen, and felt a mix of adrenaline and calm I had never known before. I wasn't just participating in this decision anymore. I was directing it. This was the moment where every choice mattered, where the quiet analyst finally held authority over millions of dollars and the fate of careers. And as I hit send, I knew that everything outside that inbox, the chaos, the celebrations, the oblivious colleagues, no longer dictated the outcome. For the first time in 8 years, the truth had power, and I was the one delivering it. Silently, decisively, and completely untouchable. As soon as I hit send, the quietest part of the office began to shift in ways no one could predict. At first, nothing seemed different. Phones rang. Slack notifications pinged. Managers walked by with confident smiles, congratulating each other for the smoothest claim in history. But then subtle changes started to ripple. A whispered question here, a double take there, someone pausing mid-conversation to check their screen. I stayed at my desk, calm, deliberately reviewing my own copies of the dossier, watching reactions without revealing a single hint of satisfaction. My heart beat steadily, but my mind raced through every possibility. Someone could push back, question my authority, try to rewrite the narrative before the committee even opened the files. I anticipated every angle, every weak excuse they might cling to, and mentally prepared counterpoints for each. And then it began. A senior manager stopped at my doorway, pretending to ask about a minor spreadsheet. But the way their eyes flicked toward my monitor told me everything. They had seen the alert. They had seen the truth. Across the room, the claims committee started opening the files I had sent, reading, nodding, pausing, questioning internally. I could feel the tension compressing the space. Around me, the office air, thick with the unspoken realization that the control they thought they had, the narrative they had curated for months, was now slipping. I wasn't loud, I wasn't aggressive, but I was undeniably present, the center of a storm they had ignored for years. Emails started arriving in my inbox with pointed questions, all perfectly professional, all acknowledging the evidence I had documented, all bending to the reality they could no longer deny. Outside, the celebrations quieted. The chatter turned cautious, respectful, almost fearful. For the first time in 8 years, my voice mattered, my diligence mattered, and the same people who had overlooked me, underestimated me, and even mocked me for being too detail-oriented were forced to recognize the truth. I leaned back, feeling the gravity of the moment. The thrill of finally holding accountability where it belonged. Knowing the final outcome wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about power, credibility, and the undeniable authority of the one who had been quiet all along. And in that silent electric atmosphere, I realized the game had changed forever. I wasn't just part of the process anymore. I was the one who had set it in motion. And no one could take it away. By mid-morning, the office had transformed into a place I barely recognized. Hushed conversations replaced confident chatter. Celebratory laughter was gone, and every glance that once ignored me now carried a flicker of calculation. Curiosity or quiet respect. The claims committee had pored over my dossier, and one by one, emails started landing in my inbox, pointed, professional, and uncomfortably acknowledging the evidence I had painstakingly compiled. I didn't celebrate, I didn't smirk. I simply reviewed each reply, noting how carefully the questions circled around the facts I had uncovered. How every manager's assumption had been quietly dismantled. My heart raced, but my expression remained neutral. The power of observation and patience had always been my secret weapon. Then, the first meeting with the senior leadership came. The SVP, the department head, even the CEO, all appearing calm but subtly tense. They didn't praise me, they didn't applaud. They asked questions, clarifications, and I answered each one concisely, with precision, referencing every email, every timestamp, every policy clause that supported my recommendation. Each answer reinforced the undeniable reality. The claim could not be approved, and anyone trying to override the facts would be accountable for millions. I felt the shift, subtle, almost imperceptible to an outsider, but unmistakable to me. The narrative had changed, and I was no longer invisible. Across the room, the manager who had previously ignored my warnings shifted, uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding my gaze, suddenly aware that the work he had dismissed now held the ultimate authority. And as the final decision was made, the claim formally denied, the files archived, the process secured, and the potential financial disaster averted, I realized that the quietest person in the room, the one everyone underestimated, had just rewritten the outcome. My inbox buzzed with follow-ups, approvals, and requests for my input on next steps, and I simply nodded, taking notes, my mind already on the next tasks, already calculating how to maintain control without overstepping. There was no applause, no public recognition, and I didn't want one. The power wasn't in being seen. It was in the undeniable truth being enforced. And for the first time, 8 years of meticulous work, invisible diligence, and unwavering integrity had culminated in a moment where the quietest voice became the one everyone had to listen to. And the lesson was crystal clear. Those who ignore warnings, mock caution, and chase appearances will always be at the mercy of the one who actually prepared for reality. By the end of the day, the office had shifted into a new rhythm. Quieter, cautious yet strangely respectful, as if the invisible architecture of authority had quietly realigned itself around me. The claim was formally denied, all documentation locked, approvals noted, and the $95 million disaster averted. But the real victory was in the subtle changes. Emails addressed to me first, requests for input on critical decisions, colleagues now pausing before assumptions, and even the manager who had dismissed me for years giving a reluctant nod of acknowledgement from across the room. I didn't need anyone to congratulate me. Didn't need the spotlight. Because the power wasn't in recognition. It was in action, in precision, in truth enforced without noise. Later, the SVP called me into her office, not to celebrate, not to hand me a trophy, but to say with calm sincerity, sometimes, the person you overlook is the one who prevents catastrophe. I simply nodded, updated my LinkedIn headline quietly to reflect my new title, Lead Cyber Claims Specialist, and returned to my desk, already immersed in the next dossier, already calculating how to stay ahead. As I glanced around the office, I realized how much had changed. Those who once mocked, ignored, or underestimated me were now quietly respecting every step I took, every recommendation I made, without drama, without fanfare, because the truth had weight and diligence had power. And in that quiet, electric moment, I understood that revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through precision, preparation, and unshakable integrity. To anyone listening, anyone who has ever felt invisible, underestimated, or overlooked, the quietest voice, the one who prepares, who watches, who acts with patience and care, can change the course of millions, and sometimes entire organizations. If you want more stories like this, true tales of betrayal, quiet revenge, and the undeniable power of preparation, subscribe to Nova Reckoning. Vault and witness the moments where the underestimated rise, silently, decisively, and completely unstoppable.